I still remember the sound of her laughter, sharp, metallic, and sweetly cruel. It was a Saturday afternoon, sunlight spilling across my kitchen table, and the scent of mint tea had just started to fade when she said it. You? A mother? If you've ever felt your excitement crushed by someone you trusted, you'll understand how silence feels heavier than shouting. Her name was Clara, my sister-in-law. Perfect hair, perfect voice, perfect way of twisting kindness into something unrecognizable. She'd come over to check on me, but her eyes darted more toward the ultrasound photo on the fridge than my face. I was 5 months pregnant then. My hands rested on my belly without thinking, the quiet gesture every expectant mother makes when the world feels uncertain. But Clara leaned back in her chair, smirking, and said, "You should give me your baby names. You won't use them all anyway." She said it like a joke, but her tone carried ownership, not humor. My husband, Daniel, shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Clara," he muttered. "That's not funny." But she only laughed harder. "Oh, come on. You know I've always had better taste." I wanted to defend myself, to say that I'd written those names down before the first heartbeat, that I'd whispered them to the ceiling when I couldn't sleep. But my throat closed. I smiled instead, because that's what polite women do. When she left, the apartment felt smaller. The ultrasound photo seemed to look back at me differently, as if it, too, understood that joy never goes unchallenged. That night, Daniel wrapped his arms around me. "Don't let her get to you," he said softly. "She's just jealous." I wanted to believe that, but there was something in Clara's laughter that didn't sound like jealousy. It sounded like warning. The weeks passed, and every conversation with her carried that same edge. When she came to family dinners, she'd touch her flat stomach and say, "Maybe I'll be next," glancing at me as if daring me to flinch. I never did. Still, every time I opened the baby name journal I kept in the drawer, I hesitated. The names I'd once written with love now felt exposed, fragile. So, I stopped writing altogether. Instead, I started listening. I noticed how Clara's compliments always arrived dressed as questions. "You're sure you're ready for this?" Or, "Did the doctor say everything's normal?" She wanted me to stumble, to reveal a crack she could widen. But what she didn't know was that motherhood, even before birth, teaches you patience, the quiet kind that observes and remembers. One afternoon, near the start of my 3rd trimester, I caught her standing in the nursery. She hadn't knocked. I found her tracing her fingers along the crib rail, smiling faintly. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said. "I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about." Her eyes landed on the journal on the shelf, the one I'd stopped writing in. "Are these the names?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She picked it up like it belonged to her. "You know, I might borrow one someday." It wasn't what she said, it was the way she said it. That possessive, gleaming tone, as though my story were hers to edit. When she left the room, I sat in the rocking chair and opened the journal. The ink on the last name had begun to fade. I pressed my palm to the page and whispered the names again, one by one, promising them protection they couldn't yet understand. That was the night I made a decision. Quiet, deliberate, and final. Clara thought she'd taken something from me that day. My joy, my confidence, maybe even my voice. But what she really did was give me purpose. I closed the journal and began writing again. Not baby names this time, but a different list. A list of moments, dates, words, the subtle humiliations she'd thought I'd forget. I didn't write it out of anger. I wrote it out of preparation. Because I had learned something important. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive in anger or argument. It arrives on paper, and it waits. And someday, I knew, she would see that list again. But not yet. Not until the laughter stopped. The weeks that followed felt quieter, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hums under the skin, the one that hides waiting storms. I could feel something shifting between us, invisible but undeniable. Clara had stopped calling as often, but she lingered at every family gathering, her laughter circling me like perfume I couldn't wash off. My body was growing heavier with each passing day, but my mind carried the greater weight. I kept hearing her words in fragments. You? A mother? As though my own doubts had learned to mimic her voice. I tried to drown them out with soft music, long walks, and nursery paint samples, but they always found their way back. Daniel, bless him, never noticed. He thought distance was the solution. "Let's not invite her for a while," he'd say, rubbing my shoulders, his voice thick with protectiveness. But family has its own gravity, and Clara had a way of pulling us back in. The turning point came one evening when Daniel's mother called. Her voice, gentle yet rehearsed, asked if we'd consider hosting a small family dinner before the baby arrived. "It'll be good for everyone," she said, her tone too careful. I agreed before I could stop myself. The night of the dinner, Clara arrived last, dressed in ivory, not white, but close enough to make a statement. She brought a small wrapped box. "A little something for the baby," she said sweetly, kissing my cheek like we hadn't been competing in silence for months. Dinner went on smoothly enough. Small talk, laughter, the clinking of cutlery. I almost convinced myself that maybe she'd changed, until Daniel's mother asked, "Have you two decided on a name yet?" Before I could open my mouth, Clara laughed. "Oh, don't tell me she's still keeping that list a secret. I told her to give it to me ages ago. I'd probably make better use of it." The table went still. My hand tightened around my fork, the metal cold against my skin. Daniel started to speak, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping him. I smiled. "Actually, Clara, I took your advice." Her eyes gleamed. "You did?" "Yes, I made a new list." She tilted her head. "Oh? Can I see?" "Not yet," I said softly. "It's not finished." The conversation moved on, but I could feel her watching me, searching for meaning. She didn't know that I wasn't talking about baby names anymore. That night, when everyone left, I sat at the table alone. The box she'd brought still sat unopened beside the empty glasses. I hesitated, then untied the silver ribbon. Inside was a pair of baby booties, handmade, delicate, and attached to a card that read, "For Clara's niece or nephew, whichever comes first." It was a small note, almost innocent. But the way she signed it, Clara Bennett, godmother, future, sent a cold ripple through me. She wasn't mocking anymore. She was claiming. I placed the card in my drawer, right next to my list. The same list that had grown longer, not out of spite, but out of truth. Each line was a reminder, a breadcrumb trail leading toward something inevitable. A few days later, Daniel came home from work early. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes heavy with something he hadn't said yet. "Clara called," he muttered. "She said you've been distant. She's worried." I laughed, a soft, tired sound. "She's worried about her reflection," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means she can't stand it when someone stops reacting to her." He looked at me carefully, unsure whether to press further. Instead, he kissed my forehead and went to shower. But I stayed at the table, staring at my notebook. The ink on the last entry was still wet. That night, I wrote something new. Not an event, but a realization. Her need for control will undo her faster than I ever could. The next morning, I received a message from Clara, a photo of an invitation. A baby shower. Mine. She'd organized it without asking, chosen the theme, the guest list, even the venue. "You're welcome," the message read. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. Then slowly I smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't show teeth, only certainty. If she wanted to control the story, she could have it. For now. Because I was done defending myself. I had something better. I had patience. And words that stayed. The morning of the baby shower arrived with that faint electric stillness before a storm. The sky outside the window was bright but unsettled, like it knew what kind of day it was going to be. I stood in front of the mirror, fastening a simple gold bracelet Daniel had given me months before. A quiet reminder that some gifts come from love, not performance. The event was held at Clara's chosen venue, a rented garden hall wrapped in white ribbons and artificial smiles. She had gone overboard, of course. There were pastel balloons, gold lettering spelling out "Welcome Baby Bennett," and a display table that looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. It was beautiful, but sterile, the kind of beauty meant for pictures, not memories. When Daniel and I arrived, Clara was already in the center of it all, wearing a pale blue dress and the expression of a queen surveying her subjects. She greeted me with exaggerated warmth, the kind that hides calculation behind affection. "You look lovely," she said. "I was worried you'd be too tired to come." "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, steady but smiling. I had rehearsed that line in my head all morning. For the first hour, I let her play hostess. She floated between guests, her voice bright and hollow, telling stories that always circled back to herself. When someone asked about the baby's name, she chimed in. "She hasn't told me yet, but I'm sure it'll be something classic." I gave her a few ideas. Each word she spoke was another thread in the web she'd built. Delicate, deliberate. The guests laughed, unaware of the subtle poison in her tone. Then came the moment she'd planned for herself. The gift opening. She took the stage beside me, microphone in hand, pretending modesty. "This next one," she said, "is from me, from family." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. She handed me a long, narrow box wrapped in white and gold. Inside was a hand-engraved silver rattle and a folded card. I read it silently. "For the little one who will grow up knowing who really cared." The handwriting was hers, neat, deliberate, unmistakable. I smiled. Not the smile of agreement, but the kind that seals something shut. "Thank you, Clara," I said softly, placing the card back into the box. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to unsettle her. When the laughter and chatter resumed, I excused myself and slipped to the corner of the garden where the breeze touched the edge of the marquee. From there I could see everything, the decorations, the laughter, the surface harmony, and underneath it all, the quiet imbalance only I could feel. Daniel found me a few minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Fine, just needed a bit of air." He hesitated, then sighed. "She's trying, you know." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe she's testing how much I'll let her take." He looked confused, almost guilty, and that's when I realized she wasn't just manipulating me. She was working on him too. When we returned to the tables, Clara was gathering everyone for a game. Guess the baby's name. A whiteboard stood at the front, ready for suggestions. She waved the marker like a baton. "Let's see who knows her best." One by one, the guests shouted ideas. Grace, Sophia, Emma. Names I'd once loved. Names I'd written in that journal long ago. My heartbeat quickened. Clara turned to me with her trademark smile. "Go on, tell us if anyone's close." I looked at her for a long moment, long enough for the laughter to thin. Then I smiled, slow and calm. "None of those," I said. "Oh?" Her voice was light, but her eyes flickered. "Then what is it?" "You'll know soon," I replied. "When it's time." The tension landed like glass cracking under velvet. She laughed again, that sharp, brittle sound. "Always so mysterious," she said. But there was a quiver in her tone now, barely masked. I excused myself early. As I left, I heard her voice chasing behind me, polite, performative. "Get some rest, okay?" Outside, the sky had shifted into a thin gray veil. I stood by the car, one hand on my stomach, and breathed slowly. The baby kicked once, firm, decisive. I took it as a sign. That night, I added another entry to my list. It wasn't about the party, or the gift, or even the rattle. It was about her eyes when she realized I wasn't reacting anymore. The power she drew from humiliation was gone the moment I stopped giving it weight. Justice, I was learning, wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. Quiet, patient balance. And she was tipping her own scale without my help. Still, I wasn't done. I hadn't turned the final page yet. Because the next part of the plan, the one I'd been preparing since that day in the nursery, was coming sooner than she thought. And this time, I wouldn't need her laughter to fill the silence. The rain started the night before I went into labor. It wasn't dramatic, just steady. The kind of rain that whispers more than it falls. I remember sitting by the window, tracing my finger along the condensation, thinking about all the months that had led here. Every insult, every smirk, every silent dismissal had settled into a strange calm inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was ready. When my contractions began early the next morning, Daniel rushed me to the hospital, panic written across his face. He tried to fill the silence with reassurance, but I wasn't listening to his words. I was listening to the sound of my own breathing. Each inhale felt like a reckoning, each exhale a release. The labor was long but steady. The pain grounded me, sharpened me. Hours passed like shadows across the wall, and by evening the crying started. Soft, trembling, then strong. They placed her in my arms, warm and impossibly small, and for a few seconds the world felt weightless. Every sound outside the room faded, leaving only the rhythmic heartbeat of new life. Daniel cried quietly beside me. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's ours." I nodded, my fingers brushing over the baby's cheek. "Yes," I said, "ours." But deep inside, a different promise was unfolding. One meant not for the child, but for the truth that had waited all this time. When visiting hours opened the next morning, Clara arrived first. Of course she did. Dressed in cream again, holding a bouquet too large for the room, she walked in with a camera-ready smile. "My goodness," she said, "she's beautiful. Almost looks like me, doesn't she?" Daniel laughed politely. I didn't. I studied her carefully, the way you study a storm when you already know where it will hit. "Have you decided on a name yet?" she asked, leaning closer, her perfume thick and invasive. "Yes," I said. My voice was soft but sure. "But before I tell anyone, I have something for you." She blinked, surprised. For me, I reached into my hospital bag and pulled out a small cream-colored envelope. It looked ordinary, almost delicate, but she hesitated before taking it. "What is this?" "Something I've been working on for a while," I said. "Open it." She tore the seal and pulled out the folded pages. Her eyes scanned the first few lines, and I watched the color drain from her face. Each page was dated, documented, a record of every word she had said, every moment she'd crossed a line, every instance she'd tried to humiliate me under the pretense of care. There were quotes from messages, photos of texts, notes of conversations. It wasn't rage that filled those pages. It was precision. "You kept track of this?" she whispered. I nodded. "Of truth." Daniel looked between us, confusion giving way to realization. "What's going on?" Clara's lips trembled. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said quietly. "This is accountability." I leaned back against the pillows, my daughter sleeping beside me. "You thought it was about baby names, but it was never about names. It was about control, about the way you wanted to define everyone's story, even mine. I'm just making sure mine is told accurately." She set the papers down, her hands shaking. "You're overreacting." This is insane," I smiled faintly. "You said the same thing when I cried over your laughter." For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a reply ready. Her posture stiffened, the performance slipping. "Clara," Daniel said, his voice low, "maybe you should go." She looked at him, searching for the old alliance that used to exist between them, the one where she could twist every situation into her favor. But he didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he picked up the envelope and tucked it into the drawer beside the bed. When she finally turned to leave, her voice was barely a whisper. "You've changed." I looked down at my daughter, tracing her tiny hand with my finger. "I had to," I said. The door closed behind her, and the room fell into quiet again. The kind that doesn't suffocate, the kind that heals. Daniel sat down beside me, still holding the drawer handle. "You planned this?" I nodded. I needed her to see it, to know I wasn't the same woman who let her words define me. He exhaled slowly. You didn't even raise your voice. I didn't have to. We both looked at our daughter then, asleep in the bassinet, her chest rising and falling in small, steady breaths. She'll have her mother's calm, Daniel said. Maybe, I whispered. But I hope she has her own voice too. That night, the rain stopped. The moonlight slipped through the blinds, painting soft silver lines across the floor. I reached over and opened the drawer again, taking one last look at the envelope before closing it gently. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth, documented, undeniable, silent, but solid. I smiled as I turned off the lamp, listening to the quiet rhythm of my daughter's breathing. The balance had finally shifted. Clara's laughter no longer echoed in my mind. It was replaced by something stronger, the sound of peace filling the space she used to occupy. The days after the hospital were quiet in a way that didn't feel empty. It was the kind of quiet that settles in after a storm, when the air is heavy but clean, and every sound carries meaning again. I'd wake up to the soft rustle of blankets, the faint coo of my daughter, the distant hum of the city outside. And for the first time in months, I didn't brace myself before opening my eyes. Daniel had taken some time off work. He spent most mornings by the crib, reading aloud from whatever book he found nearby. Sometimes novels, sometimes the newspaper, as if our daughter cared about stock prices and weather forecasts. I watched him one morning, sunlight cutting across his face, and thought about how different everything felt now. Lighter, honest. Clara hadn't called since that day. Not a message, not a visit, not even a passive-aggressive gift. The silence she'd left behind wasn't absence. It was relief. Still, I knew her. She was somewhere, reassembling her version of the story, telling it in hushed tones at dinner tables where sympathy was easy to earn. It didn't matter. Stories lose their power when they stop being yours to tell. A week later, a letter arrived. No return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Slanted, elegant, a little too precise. I opened it carefully. I shouldn't have said those things. I didn't mean to hurt you. Congratulations on your baby. No signature, just that. I folded it once, twice, then tucked it in the same drawer as the envelope from the hospital. Not out of anger, but because it belonged with the rest of it. The collection of things I didn't need to carry anymore. That night, after feeding the baby, I sat by the window again. The world outside looked washed clean. The streetlights glowed against wet pavement, the rain from earlier still lingering in the air. I thought about how everything had started, with laughter that cut, with a voice that questioned whether I could ever be a mother. And now, here I was, holding a life so small yet so certain, a heart beating because mine had learned to keep going. Daniel came over quietly, resting his hand on my shoulder. "You're somewhere far away," he said. "Just thinking," I replied. "About her?" "No," I said after a pause. "About me." He smiled faintly, kissed the top of my head, and went back to the crib. I stayed there a little longer, watching the reflection of the city lights in the window. It struck me that peace doesn't always arrive with closure. Sometimes it just walks in when you've stopped waiting for it. When I finally went to bed, I looked at my daughter sleeping between us, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket, her breath steady and light. I whispered the name we'd chosen, the one no one else knew, the one I'd guarded from Clara and the world alike. It rolled off my tongue like a secret I'd kept for myself. It wasn't the name from the journal. It wasn't from a book or list. It was new, born from everything that had happened, everything that had ended. In the stillness of that moment, I understood that motherhood wasn't about perfection, or protection from cruelty, or even forgiveness. It was about continuity, the quiet, unshakable promise to keep going. To love, even when love had been tested. I thought about the woman I'd been months ago, sitting across from Clara, too stunned to respond, too polite to defend herself. She felt distant now, like someone I used to know. The next morning, before sunrise, I took the journal from the drawer one last time. The pages were filled with both pain and proof, each line a reminder of the person I'd become. I flipped to the back and wrote a final entry. She laughed. I listened. But in the end, I was the one who spoke. Then I closed it, quietly, and placed it in the box beside the hospital bracelet and the letter. I didn't need the list anymore. The story had finished itself. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise. Thin gold slipping between the blinds, touching everything it reached. The rain had stopped. The air was soft again. I leaned down, kissed my daughter's forehead, and whispered, "Welcome home." The world, at last, was silent in the right way.